Hey everyone, welcome to the video for Chapter 9, Section 2. We're going to be talking about the rise of Russia. So in this section, we're going to discuss the emergence of Russian culture and civilization. Russia has always had a somewhat unique identity, due in large part to its geography. Now historically, here's Russia here. This big landmass that we're looking at has been divided into two continents. You've got Europe over here, and then you've got Asia over here. It's easy to make a geographic distinction between European countries like France and Asian countries like China, but Russia poses a bit of a problem. You see, it connects Europe and Asia. These mountains here that I'm circling, the Ural Mountains, they've historically been the dividing line between Europe and Asia, but they aren't a huge mountain chain, and migration across them is actually pretty easy. So while the Russian people identify as European, because as you can see, the vast majority of cities and population centers are over here on the European side, and they've got very close ties to Eastern Europe, most of the country itself over here is in Asia. And so it gives it a very, very unique identity geographically, also culturally. Now, another thing that's important to remember about Russia is that it is big. It's the largest country in the world. As you can see, just how much bigger it is than all these other countries in Asia. It also has numerous climate and environment regions. It has three major regions. Let me first erase the ink here. And then we'll look at the climate types in Russia. Now you see all the different colors that you got here. You got a lot of different colors. Some of them going from very, hot summer, humid continental. What's another one? Hot summer, humid continental. These would be more through these regions over here. But then you get into here, right? You look at the gray areas. Tundra. That is cold. Not a lot kind of growing up there. Subarctic through all of these regions as well. So it gets very, very cold up in these northern regions. It's heavily forested, but as I said, it's really, really cold up there. So the soil is often too frozen for much farming. Now to the south, those regions that I just kind of circled throughout there, it gets a little warmer. You have a temperate climate that allows for more fertile soil and large-scale agriculture, particularly down in this region in here. You see some oceanic and humid subtropical things like that. And this is where you also have your earliest Russian population centers. But the third region is known as the steppe. Now the steppe, which would kind of run all throughout here, right, which is a big area that goes all the way, through Russia into, the heart of Asia itself. This is an open treeless grassland, as you can see from that picture there. It offered great land for herding animals and the horses of nomadic people. And this made migration from Asia to Europe fairly easy. Now, Russia also has an extensive network of rivers that supported transportation and trade, especially with the Byzantine Empire to the south. But we're going to discuss that in a little bit more detail later. So now let's get into early Russia. The Russian people are ethnically a Slavic people. Slavs originally came from Central Asia and they migrated into what is today Russia during Roman times. And you can see from this map here that you've got Russian up here, but you've also got a number of other Eastern European countries such as Polish, Czech, Ukrainian, Serbs down in here and so forth. They all share a common ancestry of ethnicity. There are some similarities in their languages, cultures, things of that nature. And the first major city that they formed was Kiev. Now, Kiev today is the capital of Ukraine. So the map I just put up there, this is a modern map, and the country of Ukraine is separate from Russia. There's Moscow, the capital of Russia, and there's Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. So Ukrainian culture, though, is very closely related to Russia. And a lot of that had to do with, hold on, let me erase. There we go. Here's Kiev, and you see Kiev's location here along these trade routes. Okay, you've got the rivers that come down, you've got other trade routes that kind of circle it. So Kiev is really at the center of this whole trading area. I'm going to come back and look at this map in a later slide as well. Now, early Russian culture was heavily influenced by the Vikings. Vikings, they got on their longboats and they sailed from this region up here called Scandinavia. the region I'm circling in pink. And then some of these rivers that they went down brought them into Russia. And they eventually began settling in these areas. And the mixing of Viking culture with the existing Slavic culture, that would lead to the formation of what is considered Russian. The word Russia actually comes from the name of a Viking tribe called the Rus that dominated the area and eventually controlled the city of Kiev as well. So while Vikings helped form the foundation of early Russian culture, the Byzantine Empire would have a huge impact. Russia first came into contact with the Byzantine Empire through trade. Okay, we talked about how cultural diffusion leads to trade, and trade brought an influx of Byzantine culture to Russia. For example, let me just go over this map one more time here. So we just went over, here's Kiev again, and we see how it's at the center of this trade route, but you look down here, here's Constantinople. So it's actually not that far. You could get in a boat, go across the Black Sea, and just go up this river, and it's very, very easy to get to Kiev. So you can see the proximity and how easy it would be to have contact between these two cities. All right, but one of the major aspects of Byzantine culture that was brought to Russia was Orthodox Christianity. You see the St. Basil's Cathedral there in Moscow. When Russian rulers converted to Christianity, it formed very close ties between Russia and the Byzantine Empire. Russian rulers began modeling aspects of Russian culture and government after the Byzantine Empire. For instance, like in the Byzantine Empire, Russian rulers were in charge of the church. They also encourage aspects of Byzantine culture, such as art, music, and architecture. The domed churches, like the ones found in the Byzantine Empire, became popular in Russia, eventually evolving into these signature onion tops that we see on Russian cathedrals. And one very important cultural aspect Russian got from the Byzantines was the Cyrillic Alphabet. This alphabet was brought to Russia by two Orthodox monks, Cyril and Methodius. Now, they were both Greek, and they adapted the Greek alphabet in order to translate the Bible into the Slavic tongue. This alphabet, as you see a bunch of the letters here, is still used in Russia and other Slavic countries today. Now, the Byzantine Empire had a big influence on Russia, but it never tried to actually conquer Russia. It was content to remain a close ally in trade and culture. In the 1200s, though, another powerful empire would conquer Russia, and this empire was the Mongols. Now, we're going to learn about the Mongols in chapter 12, but for now, just know that the Mongols were a nomadic warrior people from what is today Mongolia in northern China. In the early 1200s, the multiple tribes who typically fought amongst each other were united under the rule of Genghis Khan. Now, Genghis and his descendants would go on to create one of the largest empires in the world. And in the year 1236, led by one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, Batu, they invaded Russia. And they were known as the Golden Horde. They were called this because of the yellow color of their tents. And they quickly looted and destroyed many Russian cities, among them Kiev. So you see the extent here on the map of the Russian Empire. The only area that we're really going to focus on is this yellow area. Obviously, yellow signify the Golden Horde. Now, even though Kiev and Moscow were a little outside of it, they would still regularly travel and raid into these northern parts up here. All right, so the Mongols were very feared among the Russians. They were feared by a lot of people. You really didn't want to mess with the Mongols. Now, they may have been very fearsome warriors, but they weren't really meddlesome rulers. They ruled indirectly, meaning that they allowed local princes to pretty much do their own thing as long as the Russians acknowledged that the Mongols were in charge and, most importantly, paid tribute. So the Mongols would periodically show up to get paid, but besides that, they didn't really bother the local rulers too much. Even though the Mongols did not take a very direct rule of Russia, they still had a major impact on Russian history. Now, for one thing, they opened up trade between Russia and Asia. The Mongols supported merchants and protected trade routes. Among them, you see the Silk Road here. All right, so even though the Silk Road didn't go north through the Golden Horde territory, you could still have plenty of offshoots of it, of trade routes that would go all the way up there. All right, so they protected trade routes. So under their rule, that huge Russian steppe that I talked about earlier, it was used by merchants from Central Asia and China. Now, while they kept Russia connected to Asia, they cut off Russia from Europe. So Europe was separate from these areas that were under Mongol control. And because Europe was not under Mongol rule, they were not interested in keeping trade relations with Western European nations like France and Germany. Consequently, Russia didn't have much contact with Western Europe at a time when Europeans were making rapid advances in arts and sciences. Now, Mongol rule is also going to have one last major impact, and that's turning Moscow into the seat of power in Russia. So let's talk about some of these powerful rulers that are going to emerge from Moscow. During the Mongol period, the princes of Moscow gained power. Moscow is located along important river trade routes. Here's Moscow up here. Notice it's a bit farther north of Kiev, right? So Mongol control was situated more south of that line that I just drew here. They didn't really go that much up there. They preferred the warmer grasslands around Kiev. Moscow is very cold in the winters, and it's also heavily forested, not ideal for nomads and their horses. And the princes of Moscow steadily grew in power until the year 1380, when they defeated the Golden Horde, effectively ending Mongol rule in Russia. Moscow's continued success was largely due to strong rulers, among them Ivan the Great. He ruled from 1462 to 1505 and brought much of northern Russia under his rule. He also built the framework for absolute rule. He took power away from the nobles and made Russia the successor to Byzantine power. Oh, hold on here, sorry. Get that out of there. I'll come back to that quote in one sec. Now, the Byzantine Empire ended in 1453 when the Turks captured Constantinople, but Ivan married the niece of the last Byzantine emperor, making a direct tie between the two lands. He adopted many Byzantine customs for his government, among them referring to himself as Tsar, a Russian word for Caesar. He even used the eagle as his standard, the same as the old Roman emperors. His view on power is exemplified by this quote: "By nature, the Tsar is like any other man, but in power and office, he is like the highest god." This sounds very, very similar to what Justinian said that we talked about in the last section. So while Ivan the Great only occasionally referred to himself as Tsar, his grandson, Ivan the Terrible, was the first to officially take the title of Tsar. He further centralized power in Russia by taking power away from the nobles and putting them under his direct control. He also ruled through fear and terror. He had a crew of royal agents who would arrest or murder anyone he deemed disloyal. And part of what made everyone so scared of him was that he became increasingly unstable as he got older, even killing his own son after an argument. So it's easy to see why history remembered him by the name Ivan the Terrible. More than anyone else, though, Ivan the Terrible was responsible for introducing Russia to a system of extreme power that still exists into the modern era. All right, so that's your overview about Russia, and in the next section, we will finish up this chapter and talk about Eastern Europe.